you all for inviting me to come out tonight and talk to you about a topic that I think is really appropriate for a bicentennial year for Madison County. And I came into this information just coincidentally, just in the normal course of work in the archives of the Tennessee Room. We received a collection at the end of 2019, and then with COVID and everything, I didn't have the opportunity to work on it until about 2020. But in doing so and going through those papers, it revealed a lot of information about one of our most used and most revered county history resources in the Tennessee Room, Historic Madison. So I know all of you don't research Madison County history, but how many of you who do have a copy of Historic Madison? Lots of you, lots of you. So I'm speaking to an expert room, so that puts me on edge. But what I want to do tonight with this is kind of take you through the steps that I went through as I was processing this collection. And I want to tell you something tonight that maybe you didn't know before you came. Some just interesting tidbits about the writing of Historic Madison. And it was truly a wonderful journey for me as an archivist. Who can say that they get to rifle through the time capsule when they go to work? You know, you have to love that. So, of course, there have been 3 editions. I have a copy, and I got mine at the Friends of the Library book sale. Sometimes we do see it come through the book sale, and you get it for a very good price, but of course it's out of print now. So I'm grateful to have mine. Mine is the 1972 edition. It's on the left. The 1986 edition that was made for Homecoming, Tennessee in 1986, as Tennessee looked towards the anniversary year. In the center is the 1972 edition that was made for the Jackson sesquicentennial. So it was published, I think, by the Jackson Service League, republished then. But the one on the far right, that is the first edition of Historic Madison. Do any of you have a copy that goes back? Okay, Joanne and Ricky have that. That's where we're going to stay for the bulk of what we're talking about tonight, because that is the original, and that was the task that was given. Actually, every story has a backdrop, and so the backdrop of Historic Madison was the fact that Tennessee in 1946 would have its sesquicentennial for statehood. So in preparation for this, Governor Prentice Cooper and the legislature, I'm sure, looked ahead in 1940, and they thought they should begin to make preparations for the Tennessee celebration of its sesquicentennial. Big job, big task. So, and things moved slowly in legislature, so they wanted to be well prepared. And as you can see on the right, on the title page, this was specified for the publication that it is denoted to be a contribution to the sesquicentennial celebration for the statehood of Tennessee, published in 1946. And so the background is that Governor Cooper also reestablished the Tennessee Historical Society that was first founded in the early, the 19-teens, about 1919. However, it was changed to the Tennessee Historical Commission. So he thought that there needs to be a large committee who could drive this celebration forward and be ready for it whenever the year came in 1946. This is a letterhead. You see it had a lot of members. It was statewide. There were sub-regions. The chairman was appointed Samuel Cole Williams, and for a reason. He was a very revered historian, published maybe a dozen and a half books of early Tennessee history. He was considered an authority. He was a well-known legal person. He had a career in law. He was also a judge, and most recently, at this time, he was a Tennessee Supreme Court Justice. So his name carried a lot of weight, and he, of course, had to be appointed to be chair of it. But there were diverse members, people from each division of the state, so it was a very, foresightful thing that this was, again, gotten started to help with the celebration. And here are a few members of the committee. On the left, Samuel Cole Williams, who was the chairman. There are people pictured from West Tennessee, but there are also newspaper publishers who were serving on this committee. The lady on the upper right is Penelope Allen, and she actually worked with the WPA for record transcription during the Roosevelt administration when that was very active, so she knew records throughout the state. The lady on the lower left, that is Mrs. John Trotwood Moore is how she signed her name, and she was the state librarian, so she was active on the committee. Next to her, though, is our own local member of the Tennessee Historical Commission, Clarence Pickford. He was an attorney, he was publisher of the Jackson-Sun, and very interested in history. He served on the Tennessee Historical Commission. The man on the right, Attorney John Gray, I think he was from Haywood County. So just an example of some of those who served. So initially there was a meeting, and it was judged that some celebrations can be somewhat frivolous, but the intention was to have a very lasting impact on Tennessee. And how better to do that than to produce county histories in those counties that didn't have histories. There were probably about 20 to 30 counties that didn't have their own history and publication, and so that was on the outset the goal. So when Mr. Pickford came back to Jackson from that meeting, he then networked with his friend W.A. Caldwell, who was on the board of the Jackson-Sun as an attorney and a businessman in Jackson, and they set about organizing a local historical society to support the research and writing of Madison County history. So this is actually page 1 of their minute book, and I want to let you know that we have those on microfilm in the Tennessee room. Very interesting reading. The next day, after Mr. Pickford and Mr. Caldwell met with a group of close friends who were very interested in history, then of course, because of Mr. Pickford's connection, there appeared in the Jackson-Sun on the front page the article that you see that the society is being formed to produce a history book for Madison County in conjunction with the sesquicentennial, and they are wanting the public to know about it already. So this is quite a bit ahead of the celebration. They were very wise to begin to work on it. So these were the local people who were considered to be, I guess, the task force of that. Mr. Pickford and Mr. Caldwell, as well as Hugh C. Anderson, who was a judge. He was justice on the appellate court. Hartnell Towns, who was a circuit court clerk. Harris Brown was an editor of the Jackson-Sun. And then next to him, Seal Johnson, who was president of McCowan-Mercer Press. And then Bernice Berry, who was a teacher at Jackson High School. Well, who would you want to have on the task force besides legal people, financial people, and publishers? It was a dream team. It was really, they knew who to pick, who to approach. Fortunately, they were all very interested in history. So after that initial meeting, when they formed their task force and started the minutes of the Madison County Historical Society, they began having monthly meetings, and the next month they invited other members. It wasn't generally public at that time, but they would invite people who they thought would be very seriously interested and who had some contributions. You'll notice that the librarian, Alice Shepard, Miss Inman Williams then, at the very second meeting, was a member. There were city commissioners, there were medical professionals, there was a postmaster. So every aspect of history that, in retrospect, you read in Historic Madison, you see those fields are beginning to come together on the outset. And so Judge Anderson was at first the chairman of the committee, and he sort of had, I guess, a working theory or an MO, a modus operandi to approach this. But if you were given that task, how would you do it? I mean, as a group, if you were given a task as the Madison County Genealogical Society to produce a book like that, where would you begin? I don't know where I would begin. But Judge Anderson certainly had some thoughts about it, that they would begin to seek out primary reference materials. They would, I guess by word of mouth and publication, look for those and try to use very well researched information, very well cited sources. And I have a theory, just after reading this, the papers in this collection, that Miss Emma Inman Williams was already well known to this committee, because she had already researched Madison County history in the past when she was in graduate school at the University of Chicago, getting her master's in history. So what Judge Anderson had thought, they would collect letters, old letters, newspapers, diaries. They would approach pioneer families of Madison County, and then they would choose a repository. They chose the library. So in essence, they were building a special history collection for research. They reached out not only to Madison County families, but also to adjacent counties, those who had come through Madison County relatively early and may have moved on, but might have known some contemporaries in early Madison County history. They also sought out special collections, and I think this is Miss Emma's influence right away, in that she had already encountered a lot of these resources at the state library with newspaper publication, early newspapers, special collections, diaries that she had used to write her thesis, but also to University of North Carolina, the Draper collection at the University of Wisconsin, where a lot of early materials have been assembled, especially for newspapers that pertain to West Tennessee. And last but not least, the Library of Congress. Right off the bat, Judge Anderson was eagerly, trying to research with colleagues, in communication with the legal professionals that he knew in other counties, trying to locate materials for this. And in less than a month, he had already made contact with a man in Hardeman County who possessed original diaries and letters from a man named Calvin Jones, who was one of the very early men who came through Madison County. He had an assemblage of not only newspapers, but he had letters from Declaration of Independence signers, from John Sevier and his contemporaries. Calvin Jones was a brigadier general in the North Carolina militia, so he was well known to national figures, and he landed in Madison County very early. So the fact that one of his descendants had all of these papers in Hardeman County, Tennessee, was an absolute plus. So immediately, the letter sent back to the Tennessee Historical Commission that we are beginning to find absolute and authentic original materials to do research for our history. I think he really wanted to impress Judge Williams, who was the chair. But they found other things as well. They found original Bibles. They found at the University of North Carolina the Juliana Connor Diary, which is included in the appendices to Historic Madison. And that is the story of a young woman who came quite early into Madison County in the 1820s. Then locally, also the McCory family had a lot of personal family papers that included notable letters. Letters of Andrew Jackson and David Crockett were being unearthed at this time through this task force, and it was really an amazing time. And I think there were the right people in the right place at the right time, to paraphrase Miss Allie Drake, the early librarian. However, in 1943, when this begins, how do you see all of those things? Well, you ask for them in the mail. What were they thinking? Writing letters. Mr. Boyd, would you mind sending me your Adam Huntsman letters? Would you mind mailing the David Crockett letter? I would love to inspect it, and we promise we'll get it to you just as soon as we're through with it. We'll take very good care of it. So, it was a different world in the way of research. Now we take a lot for granted, and we have microfilm readers. They did not have those locally. We have computers. They certainly didn't have that. So access was difficult. It was challenging. People didn't travel much, and by this time, at the point when they're starting, World War II is broken out. So gasoline is rationed, paper is short, there's rationing going on. So it was not easy to gain access to these things. So the fact that they were finding by word of mouth, by networking, through all of these members of the Tennessee Historical Commission, were finding very unique things to use to read and to make notes. Miss Inman traveled quite a lot to do that. And at first, she wasn't even guaranteed to be the author of the book. They just knew that they had to produce a book. And she was interested, of course. She completed her master's degree at the University of Chicago. And she was teaching history, and of course she wanted to be a part of it. But formally, the author was still to be determined. So by the time of 1944, well towards the sesquicentennial celebration, she presented at one of the meetings her paper. She read it, as many did. Many of the members would present research that they do for local information, local history research. And just to inform the members, just to help each other take notes and to network and to grasp the scope of what the book would become. So throughout that process, and I have a feeling, this is just my personal opinion, that Judge Anderson was very well acquainted with Miss Emma, and that she'd probably spoken to him during the course of her graduate studies. But after she read her paper the next month, she was presented as a possibility. She was nominated to be the author of the book, and depended upon how the membership felt about it. But they did elect her unanimously and chose her to be the author of Jackson-Madison. And since she was teaching history, she had access to resources that she had used previously in graduate school that were mentioned to her by faculty. She was certainly well placed, absolutely so. Already they were very, very supportive of her. They're writing each other, they're writing the Tennessee Historical Commission about her credentials, her training, her schooling, and calling her, in the words of Seal Johnson at the top, the #1 historian in our county, in our society. So they knew that she was uniquely qualified. However, since this is a state project, and since there would be state funding involved with it, the Tennessee Historical Commission and the state legislature knew that they should have some guidelines for these counties. As I say, they really wanted to have about 20 to 30 county histories produced. And so how to keep them consistent, or how to keep them, top-notch and creditable. So then they drafted a paper called Plans for County Histories. And it was 2 pages. I'm sure that Judge Williams and all the other members of the Historical Commission, which met regularly, sat and just sort of hammered out the details. They had hoped that it would run about 300 to 350 pages, but there were a few things that they really specifically wanted. And the reasoning, I think, is because Judge Samuel Williams had an idea from his authorship of so many books of what he thought was a good idea. So I have his book actually, if you want to pass it around. This is what Historic Madison, according to the guidelines that they drafted, would have been about this size and about this appearance. I don't know if you want to pass it around. If you've seen it, I'll collect it and get it back in our collection later, Jack. Promise. Some of you may have seen it already. One thing that was very specific is they wanted rosters of Revolutionary soldiers or any conflict in which the county participated. They wanted a roster of those who participated in that. So some things were very, very specific. When Miss Emma gets ready, she is certainly very ready to go work on this, having just gotten her degree a couple of years previously. So she submitted an outline. She's thought about it. She has been appointed to be the historian to write the book. And so she submits an outline to Judge Williams. I saw in another letter, however, Judge Williams to Seal Johnson, and Miss Williams did submit an outline, and he amended it and returned it to her. So he certainly had very specific ideas about what the book should be. And then he sort of called her down for having notes showing sources of her information. And it will not be the policy in our county histories. They are for the general reader, not for the scholar. This is not a college textbook. So his idea was to just pretty much write something that is more popularly informational, I'll say. So, we have the background, starting in Nashville, but coming to Madison County, and now we have the drama, the story. They just both came from such different backgrounds. Judge Williams graduated from law school in 1884. I think he was born in the 1850s. He had a successful law career. He was appointed Supreme Court Justice. He wrote so many books already. He was well known. I'm sure everybody who saw him said, "Yes, Your Honor." And so along comes Miss Inman Williams. She had gotten a BS degree at Washington University in St. Louis. She went to University of Chicago in 1941, right on the outset of World War II. And then she was a history teacher. So she, though, had received such a scholarly education and had such good guidance from her faculty. But I don't think that Judge Williams was very receptive of a modern young woman, showing him up, so to speak, with his history information, with his writing. She wanted, in her idea, she wanted to have source citations supporting the information. That Madison County events, instead of following a format that would be determined by other counties, including much older counties in East Tennessee, instead of following that format, she wanted to adapt it, exclude some of those things she couldn't cover for Madison County, and then move on to those that were more pertinent. And James Madison and Andrew Jackson had been written about so much, there was no need just to rehash that and use pages and chapters of the outcoming book, because again, paper was very hard to come by. It was a premium because of the shortages in World War II. And she wanted to finish by late summer. Remember, she was a school teacher, so she had to work in the summertime. It was difficult for her to maintain a full-time job teaching through 9 months of the year, and then have just a little time where she could travel and go to those repositories to do her research. But no. He thought footnotes would be minimal. He wanted lots of space for bench and bar. And he returned her notes with his ideas. She had sent a request to him for citing some of the references that she read. She did go to his books right away, Beginnings of West Tennessee. And he just returned it to her and said, check it against the book. And he was very adamant that the history should be published by the spring of 1946 and not by late summer. It wasn't easy. It was a very arm's length relationship there. This is a page on the letterhead, of course, written by Judge Williams. Well, it is difficult to read. It is very difficult to read. And so she called her friend Seal Johnson, her friend and colleague, and said, can you help me read this? I've already spent 2 weeks trying to go through his notes, and I just have to mark it and go back to it over and over. That was a problem at first. And she just felt that at every suggestion, at every thought that she had from her training in graduate school, that he had a reason not to do it. There was some reason why we should not publish that. It should be different. It should have a different appeal, a different flavor. And she just boiled it down to the fact that he was from a good old boy system in the legal profession, and he just thought that a woman should not write the book. It should be probably a male historian, so that he was a little bit biased about that. And then the fact that she was teaching, the fact that he was very insistent about the deadline. She had to be in school. She had to actually sometimes recruit students to help her do a few things. Meetings with the other historical society members were very difficult with their work schedules. She's writing to Judge Anderson that yes, she'll be glad to meet with him, but after 4 o'clock or on Saturday. Now, how likely is that going to happen for a judge? How often will he do that? But I think he was really very supportive of her. But her time was very precious. I don't think her handwriting was that much better, do you? Than Judge Williams, actually. I think if she spent a little more time, she could get it. And there were other things that happened along the way. Early in 1945, Clarence Pigford passed away. He died suddenly. And I think, actually, they were very good friends. I think that he received her very well, that as a member of the Historical Commission in Nashville, and she is a selected author of the book. I think that they really had a very good working relationship. So that was a loss. Again, there was not that representative going to Nashville to stay abreast of all of the events leading up to the sesquicentennial. Also, the Madison County Historical Society is having to produce a program every month. They're having to find somebody who's going to be willing to research a topic, write a paper, and read it the first Tuesday of every month. So not only are they writing a book, but they're having to get people to commit to do that. Also, if you've read the newspapers on microfilm for 1946, have any of you seen an article on Madison County history by Inman Williams? Those were running as a column in the newspaper. It was a very good idea because it was leading up with anticipation to the production of the book. But it also took time to do that. So I just can't conceive of that. Also, there were a few things that the Madison County Historical Society just absolutely thought it had to have in its book. And that is anything on David Crockett, elusive letters of David Crockett, and then also listings of Confederate veterans. So back then, it was very difficult to get rosters, military rosters, without approaching the archives. So they spent a lot of time in correspondence with each other, trying to secure just who would have served in Madison County. And of course, logically, not many Union soldiers. So with these particular challenges, what do? You reach out to some elected official who might have sway with the National Archives or who might have sway with the state library. So they wrote Jim McCord and Tom Murray, who was a representative, and Senator Kenneth McKellar. Now, he was a very good contact because he was on the committee for the post office, and he was working behind the scenes a little bit through his wife and secretary to get postmasters for the information in the Madison County book. And not only researching challenges with the war effort, with just the time constraints, just the busyness of everything that they had to do, programming and writing articles, they had to worry about how are we really going to fund this book. The State Historical Commission was to give a grant of $1,000. They wanted the county and the city to be able to give grants of $500 each. And there was a clause in the state legislature that year on the outset that counties and cities could do that if they chose to divert some funding. And then, since state money is involved, they're going to have to bid out the job and get the best available figure that they can for what they want to have. Seal Johnson wrote Governor McCord and asked for additional state funds. But there is a letter from the governor to Seal Johnson saying, you know, we have a war going on right now, and I cannot say that I can commit the funding for that. There are families with sons and daughters who were, you know, in the Army and in the armed services. So it would be a little frivolous to do that at this time. But he was otherwise supportive. He just could not commit additional funds. So then they had to be very creative and think about how are we going to raise funds for this. One thing they did is they asked for donations, and then they did bid out the job. The first publisher is the publisher of the book that you're passing around by Samuel Cole Williams. That seemed to be his go-to publisher. Bechtold Company in St. Louis, Missouri was also approached close to time for the manuscript to be completed. And then, lo and behold, McCowett-Mercer Press, Jackson, Tennessee, President Seal Johnson, resident of Jackson and member of the Historical Society. Now, how do you suppose he knew how to bid to get the job? He was opening the mail for the society. He's the corresponding secretary, so he sees everything coming in. I only learned recently, though, that Bechtold Company in St. Louis, it was a very, very old publishing company. And they had been around since the 1850s. They were on the waterfront in St. Louis, very similar to McCowett-Mercer in spirit. But they were involved in a federal lawsuit, so how are they going to publish a book? So I think it was a done deal, don't you? So this is just a photograph of one of the offices in McCowett-Mercer. You know, we think now of rooms of computers, computerized presses, uploading digital documents, PDFs, but there are typists in a small room, not well lit, and they probably work from the time they get there until the time they leave at the end of the day. Oh, notice the framed pictures on the wall. It'll be difficult for you to see that, but there's a battlefield scene from the Battle of Nashville, and then there's a map, and then other things in the other room you can just barely see if you inspect that photograph that were particularly of interest to Seal Johnson. So this is the Jackson of that time. You know, they're bidding out the job in the late part of 1945. They're still trying to secure information on David Crockett letters, on rosters of Confederate soldiers, but they know that they have a deadline. And so Miss Emma is typing the manuscript as she goes along, kind of topically. Things that come later, in the later stages of their research, are planned to be inserted into appendices for the book, and that's the format that we know. The Diary of Juliana Connor, and David Crockett letters and the Jackson letters. So they were part of the process, and in the later stages, that was sort of the push to secure all of that and wrap that up. But it was a different world then, and these men who worked together and the women who were on the task force, the nucleus of their Madison County Historical Society, could just pick up the phone and call each other, or maybe even cross the street and then confer. They really had a great working relationship. They all had specialized knowledge of certain things, skills that they lent to the project as a whole. And in the end, the first printing, they printed 1,336 books. This is a statement, the report way after the end of the publication and distribution of the book, Cartmel Towns, who was the treasurer of the society. And Miss Emma, she made $1,040 over the course of her time since being appointed as the author of the projected history book. That's roughly, on another page of his statement, $130 a month that she got in summer months, then with some reimbursement figures. But when all was said and done, and the sesquicentennial finally arrived, they were really busy working hard to contact those members of the Historical Commission who were connected to newspapers, historical journals, publications, the Press Scimitar, the Nashville Tennessean, whose editor was on the board of the Tennessee Historical Commission, also genealogy societies, and asking for book reviews. So Marshall Wingfield wrote, and it was put into Volume 5 of the Tennessee Historical Quarterly. That is the sesquicentennial edition of the Tennessee Historical Quarterly, and so many things appear about the outcome of all of this project. Other counties involved, different activities, parades, plays being enacted, but the most lasting thing, and it was exactly as the Historical Commission thought, that the most lasting thing would be a good resource book in a library or in a personal library that could address history information for the home county of the buyer or the reader. And Marshall Wingfield, who was in Memphis, Tennessee, with the West Tennessee Historical Society, was very complimentary, understanding that Miss Emma sometimes bespoke of other counties around us in the way that they related, or that their early residents knew the residents of early Madison County history, and that no county is an island unto itself, that you have to understand contextually. So the program was a success, and it turns out that Miss Emma's book was the very first completed. Despite the fact that she was very adamant about not having time as a teacher and having so much to do, the other counties didn't make the date, so to speak. And the stipulation of the grant was it must be published in 1946, so she made it. And it was very well received. It received wonderful reviews from American history quarterlies and history journals throughout many regions of the U.S. So this is Miss Emma's picture from the Historical Quarterly, and she got to speak at the sesquicentennial event as the first author of county history to successfully complete her book. So she was an incredible author, and she had a lot of difficulties along the way that I think she wasn't really sure how to address. Attitudes that a woman could not write a history book, or that somehow it just wouldn't be the type that would sell, or it wouldn't be lasting. It wouldn't have a legacy, so to speak, I guess. she certainly did well with that, and I didn't mean to minimize her reactions from the letters, but it just shows that she was a human being with pressure, just like everybody else. So we certainly have a wonderful book, and just want to encourage you, if you don't have a copy, to come up to the Tennessee Room. We do have on our shelves several different editions of it, and it is digitized now, so people can access it from home. It's on the Hathey Trust.